Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Philosophical Fridays. Today we have ΔutoΔlchemy, or I don't know, do you want to go by your real name? It's up to you.
I'm Jeffrey, but my YouTube channel is ΔutoΔlchemy. I'm happy either way.
Okay, I'll probably call you Jeffrey just because I won't be able to stop.
That's fine.
So today we're going to talk about something really exciting, and there's a lot of controversy around this subject, and it's something that we both have pretty strong opinions about, which is the idea of, do souls even exist? And I think later on in the conversation we'll probably span out into further opinions on that. But we can start with I was thinking that we would start with the negatives, the contradictions to if souls exist, and then we could kind of break in with counter arguments.
I did want to say really quickly, I don't know if I have strong opinions, but I certainly have more or less crystallized opinions. Sorry to be NT nitpicky already.
That's such a TI. I don't actually have strong opinions or beliefs. No.
But I mean, there are a lot of areas where I feel like I'm more or less agnostic, and I do think that I'm actually leaning in a particular direction with this question. So you're not wrong. I mean, it's a strong opinion for introverted thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Well, careful there, though. You might have Eric coming on your case because I don't know if you saw his recent video about why conversations about religion can never come to a conclusion. And he's like, you know what? I don't like agnostics because they don't take a side.
I see. I see. I didn't actually watch the video, but I would like to, because I think that his content, that sort of content is my favorite content that he does.
Yeah. Yeah, where it's actually about, compromise, creating arguments and actually understanding the different parts of the argument. It's more educational rather than just trolling.
For sure. Fragmenting everything down into the different frameworks and then trying to get a bird's eye view of it.
Exactly. It's good for people like me who have no TI to learn from people who know how to organize their TI.
Mm-hmm.
Are you drinking LaCroix?
I am, yeah. I actually tend to do it in all of my interview videos. It's become one of my character quirks.
You're that guy. Such a hipster.
Yeah. Well, I don't like to drink soda. I do like to drink it, but I like to drink it too much. But that's not particularly philosophical. Yeah, I need something carbonated to sip on. That's not gonna make me morbidly obese.
No, I know what you mean. Having something fizzy is nice, which doesn't really have much to do with souls, but
Well, I think that the soul is a carbonation of the body. So you shake a body up and the soul wants to just spew out of the top.
That's all right. That's an all right analogy.
That's a segue.
So what are I think you were oh man, I can't remember the term, but you were talking about some concept that was completely against the idea of souls. I was just can you tell me more about? I'm sorry, I can't remember the name. It was from a month ago.
Yeah. For context here, Michelle and I exchange emails a lot because we're both writers and we're both kind of sharing our stories, and sometimes we have these philosophical tangents. So I was trying to explain at one point the concept of, am I frozen?
No, it was just lagging a little bit. You're fine.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to explain at one point the concept of eliminative materialism, which is the idea of trying to eliminate anything out of our conceptions or pictures of the universe, anything that is non-material. So, anything outside of, atoms and whatever the basic building blocks of the world are. And that's a pretty popular philosophical school of thought. I think that most of the intellectual heavyweights in philosophy kind of lean in that direction. It's not just the idea. They don't really talk much about souls because there's not a lot of talk about souls in academic philosophy anyway. But even something like consciousness, or things like love, or just like mental concepts like that, they're trying to ultimately reach a scientific picture of the world where those things are eliminated completely. Like those should not be part of like a scientific picture of what the world is. They're more like these crude caveman things that we cling to make sense of the world, but they're going to be as archaic to some future scientist as, I don't know, I can't think of a good example, but
The Earth is flat.
yeah, as that is to us, to most of us anyway. That's another thing that I have pretty firm opinions about.
There is speculation that it's purely just like it started out as a troll movement and it actually got traction with people who actually believed it. But anyway, so more about this like extreme materialism, I guess, for lack of a better word. I'm sure. What's the actual word? I'm sorry.
Eliminative or eliminative. I don't know where you want to put the emphasis.
Eliminative. Yeah. Anyway. So basically the idea is that any kind of emotion or feeling or anything that's beyond like just synapses firing in your brain that cause some kind of reaction that we relate to some like old way of thinking that has come from like a survival instinct or like a sociological instinct. Those are all just that. They're just instincts, and that there's nothing like higher behind that. It is just like a relation to synapses that were like taught from birth on. Is that basically what it means?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty fair summary.
So, I mean, actually, I think I've seen a lot of that kind of thinking in philosophy is like, because it makes sense to a degree to want to like take away and eliminate those factors, because then you're just left with like raw facts, which in a way like feels really like TI to me. Like philosophy is like full of a lot of TI people who have these weird convoluted theories. Like Descartes was like impossible to read. I'm just saying, like the way that he talked about things.
That's so funny because for me, he was like the easiest to get into, and I totally like related to his entire thing that he was trying to do. Like when I was in high school, before I even read any philosophy, I was like, I think the best way to be certain about anything is to doubt everything until I get to the bedrock and try to find something stable to build on, to build like an introverted thinking framework. I didn't even have like that lexicon or that vocabulary to work with, but that's just how I thought about it. And so I was like, damn, a kindred spirit who already beat me to the punch. So
yeah, no, and I definitely like can see how that could be beneficial. I mean, to doubt everything. But then at a certain point, what if you're doubting truths and you're like eliminating them because you have doubt for them, which, I don't know, rabbit hole. That's a rabbit hole that we could get down.
yeah. Well, I mean, I guess like the point is supposed to be that you should run into something that you can't doubt, that it's like impossible to doubt, and then you can build your way back up to those truths that maybe you doubted before, while getting rid of things that didn't belong there to begin with. But I do think that there's like major issues with that whole thing, because why aren't you doubting the whole exercise of doubting? Like everything is motivated. Like his whole thing was trying to like justify the existence of God, because God was like the one thing that was beyond doubt. I mean, that's a very poor paraphrase of that's eventually where he got. It was all motivated by trying to argue for God. So yeah, I think that you can't get outside of that. You're always motivated by something, and you're never doing this like pure exercise in rationality, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of interesting how like he brought it, in a way you can relate to that, because he brought it down to the idea that God exists to some capacity. And I always just thought that his like argument for it made no sense. Like when I was reading his, I was like, I don't know how this leads you to believe that God exists, but okay. Like your argument is flawed just by like the basis of it. I don't know. It was frustrating. That's probably why I don't know. I don't like reading biased stuff. I'm pretty good at like recognizing when things are biased, unless it's me, and then I'm like, oh, I'm not biased.
Completely blind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which I guess we're all probably like that. But what I was getting at is like, in a way, like if you go based off God, even in just like the Old Testament, like don't even look at the New Testament, just the Old Testament, something that is repeatedly stated, if you do believe in God, is that he's the Spirit, the Son. Oh well, the Son, I guess. Oh wait, oh man, that's actually the New Testament, because then he's the Son and the Father and the Spirit. Now I'm having trouble remembering how is God referred to as a spirit at all, like being a spirit in the Old Testament?
I think so, or at least it's heavily implied, I think. But I'm really not the person to go to for this kind of topic.
Yeah, it's been far too long since I read that all the way through. I mean, probably we're talking like middle school since the last time I like really read anything like seriously
Yeah.
in the Bible. Even though like it is interesting. And I've read like passages here and there, but I guess I've never looked for that specifically. But I mean, even if you just take away the whole idea of the Trinity and you just look at God as being like a spirit and he's within all of us, I think that is a motif that like shows up a lot throughout the Bible, is that God is within each and every one of us. Which to me, how could like, in what capacity is he within us is the question that I ask. Like, if this is true, if he is within us, to what capacity? You know, is it just like we think about him and therefore he's in us, or is it more consciousness level? Like, where is that separation?
Interesting. That's pretty interesting. I don't know. It's a good question. I have thoughts, but I think that it might take us a little too off the rails to go down that path just yet. Maybe we can circle back though.
Right. Well, maybe we should go back to that original point of eliminative materialism and just talk about the idea of like, if it is just synapses in the brain, I mean, at what point does something become like a living conscious being? Like, and what is consciousness? Because by that kind of mentality, then there would be literally no such thing as consciousness. So how are you to know when a baby that's just born is conscious and when it's not? Is it just literally like the second it starts breathing, but it was like alive before then? I mean, it's a growing living organism. So at like what point does it just like eliminate the idea of consciousness altogether?
Yeah, that's part of the objective, I think, is they see consciousness as being something that needs to be stamped out of our story of what the world is actually like. And I mean, I think, and that would also go for things like any sort of mental phenomenon. You know, if there is something that's mental, it's really just the brain operating however it operates. But I don't know. It's so complicated. Like, do you think that the soul, like for you, do you equate the soul as being mental, or is it something beyond what's mental? Like, these concepts are all kind of like loosely interrelated, but it's hard to get clear how they fit together.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting question to ask. Like, is it mental or is it beyond the mental? Which, like, personally, I think that there is no consciousness in your thinking, your thoughts, and your mind. Like, the synapses that are firing, they are like synapses in your brain. There's nothing like, they just happen randomly, like no matter what, like there's going to be some like randomization to it. But at the same time, like when your brain is going through these thoughts, like you develop a personality and you develop attention to certain thoughts over other thoughts, because like at some point you're having all different kinds of thoughts, but you're choosing at some subconscious level to focus on certain thoughts. And if you take away things like abuse or trauma, like there are still like certain ways of looking at things that I don't know, I feel like they supersede some kind of like environmental construct in terms of like mental thoughts and what you're thinking about.
I had trouble processing all of that. I mean, you didn't say anything that jumped out to me as being like wrong. It's just I don't know where to dive in.
Well, okay. Let me see if I can expand further.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm like saying contradictory things. Like I can definitely hear that could be causing some confusion because I'm like, oh, the thoughts that you're having, like those are synapses, but is the attention to the thought the consciousness, or is it a learned behavior based off environment? I guess is the question.
The attention as in what you're choosing to focus on?
Right, because you have all these different thoughts all the time, but your mind, like something chooses to focus or prioritize some thoughts over other thoughts. And how much of that could possibly be your environment?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and kind of overlaps pretty nicely with some things that I think about. Well, so I'm pretty interested in Buddhism. I don't call myself a Buddhist by any means, but I find it to be like an attractive lens of viewing the world. And so I guess in some forms of Buddhism, I don't want to say all, you kind of encounter this idea that the thoughts that kind of percolate in your mind are the same. Like me having some random thought about a hamburger is as equally arbitrary or random as me seeing a bird flying outside of my window. Like I have no like volitional control over that. It's just something that's taking place in the landscape, and this landscape happens to be like mental as opposed to physical. But I do think, I mean, I personally believe that what you focus on does sort of like focus is like the one thing that we have to like slowly like reshape the reality. First of all, like in our immediate vicinity, like if I focus on this thing as opposed to this thing, I become more and more of this kind of person. And then as a result, like I can impact my environment and change it into something like a little more to my liking. And that can just kind of like expand outward in these concentric circles. But I don't know, maybe that's a tangent, but I totally see what you're saying. And I think that we might be on the same page here, or on a similar page anyway.
Yeah, so let's like dive further into that. So like you two are saying that like to some degree, like the focus and what you're thinking about is unique to the person, and like the thoughts are rather arbitrary in general, and like how you choose to shape your environment is your decision based off what you're focusing on, based off the thoughts that you're having. And my question is, how in the heck can children develop personalities by the time they're like 2 or 3? Like, is it purely based on the reactions that they're getting from the people around them? Like, because eliminative materialism would say, I would guess, that any personality traits that you form are 100% purely based off environment. Because personality is the attention. It's what you're paying attention to. I think that really is like what determines a personality.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that they would say necessarily that. I mean, I think that they could still say that personality is determined by like complicated brain neural firing patterns, but I don't know. I don't know if that changes what you're trying to say.
I think that's pretty much the same. You're just explaining how they would say
you're just diving into it a little bit. But yeah, I mean, they would definitely eliminate anything but something at that level.
There's just a part of me that just like cannot agree with that kind of mentality. Well, someone was posting on another video, and I'm like saying a vague generalization of what they said. But they were talking about like a philosophical novel that some author wrote. And of course, I'm sorry, I don't remember any of the details right now about the name. But basically like this alien race comes to humanity and like meets up with us, and they're like the exact opposite of us, and like they only understand a human's pain by realizing that it's a certain firing of synapses in the brain, because otherwise they wouldn't have. And they're like this kind, like, I'm guessing similar to what you're talking, similar to that eliminative materialism, because they're like a super advanced scientific race of beings that are just opposite of humans because they've chosen not to believe in anything.
Okay. Yeah, I actually saw that comment, and it was so gargantuan that I didn't really like process it as fully as I wanted to. But I think that the person who wrote that is pretty well versed in like academic philosophy, because I've seen something very similar to that whole line of reasoning before. Um, yeah, I don't know what to make of it though. I feel like it's almost a fundamental mistake to even think that there is something out there. Like, we don't have any reason to believe that we understand the world as it is. But I think we have every reason to believe that the world itself is vastly different from how we understand it. Does that make sense? So I don't really see like the appeal of trying to explain everything in terms of this like empirical, objective, external phenomenon, when in reality, like, we're not really adapted to see the world as it is. We're adapted to see the world as we are evolutionarily fit. Just like we see things that like serve us as evolutionary creatures. So I don't know. I feel like that complicates things, but I don't know what you should take away from that.
So I guess my question is, do you mean like on a like perceptual level, like third, like, oh my gosh, like second, oh my gosh, why am I having 2D, 3D, 4D, etc.? I'm sorry, I can't like think of the word for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dimensions. Oh my gosh, there we go. That's the word.
Oh, okay. That's what you're
Goodness.
getting at. Yeah, I didn't. So wait, repeat the
So,
question then.
so are you basically saying that we're stuck on like a third dimensional planular way of looking at things, like in understanding certain things that are happening? Because 3D also has linear time frames as well, which means A plus B led to C led to D. So are you basically saying that, like, evolutionarily speaking, we're on a plane to understand the third dimension, and that kind of thought only tries to further ground us into the dimension that we're in right now, evolutionarily speaking?
I think that that's a part of what I'm saying, but I think I'm gonna go on a tangent, and you can stop me at any point.
Great.
There's this uh, neuroscientist by the name of Donald Hoffman, who I think is really cool, and he, I think, works for the University of California. I think, I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
But he's really smart, first of all, and he's like trying to do some really like cutting edge stuff with consciousness studies and all that. Basically, his whole argument is, I actually have some notes. I might need to consult my notes here so that I don't butcher it. Yeah, so basically, what he's trying to say is that we don't really experience the world. We experience like an interface. So whenever you like look at your computer and you click on the recycle bin, there's nothing that's part of the computer that recycle bin resembles. The icon is merely an icon. It's something that is like a tool that helps us meet a certain objective. And in the same way, like when you see water, that's just part of like the interface. You know, it doesn't tell you anything about like what is actually out there. So essentially, if we don't actually know or can't grasp what's out there outside of our like constructs and our our evolutionary history, then why do we privilege that over our own subjective experience of having consciousness, of having free will? Like, that's something that I really struggle with, is understanding, like, that seems to me like less of, it just seems like an assumption. Like, people just start with like the assumption that it's rational and it's like scientific. to focus out here as opposed to what's going on here. But I think you could build a whole scientific like method out of the opposite assumption. Maybe.
No, actually, I've had really similar thoughts to what you're talking about. Like, how can we make this basic assumption that the external perception that we have that is like, quote unquote, agreed upon to some certain degree is the ultimate truth? And how do we adhere specifically that it's the only thing that we'll trust and it has the only value, even though there are still things on a subjective level that we're experiencing that don't really align with the physical world? So why does that make your things happening inside your mind less important or less real than what's happening outside of you in a way that is like observable by multiple people? Am I like kind of summarizing that correctly?
That's very good. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's definitely, like I said, that's something that I think about a lot too. And that kind of brings me to thinking about like older shamanistic kind of rituals and medicines and those kind of things where they use soul as a part of that therapy. Like they either through the use of like hallucinogenic medicines or through just like prayers and like rituals, they try to address health from a soul internal level. And the things that people have described while taking things like peyote or ayahuasca, like these strong DMT related ritualistic drugs that in South America, actually, I think it's it's protected under the laws now to where the shamans in their original communities can still use those drugs for their rituals. Like they haven't been told it's illegal, even though it's illegal for anybody else. And the things that people have seen while doing that, like the congruencies between it in a way that like kind of, I feel like forces you to realize, well, forces at least me to think that there's no way that so many people across so many centuries could see so many similar things, that even in like unrelated parts of the world, like where they were not connected, they did not have a way of communicating with each other like they do now, they saw similar themes or similar imagery. How could that possibly not exist?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm pretty reluctant sometimes to make big claims about metaphysical things, but it just seems like there has to be, it kind of feels like this plate tectonic kind of thing where even though we don't really see what's beneath our experience or what sort of forces are shaping the world, we are kind of like seeing these different like archetypical energies kind of clashing, and it implies that there's something like more structural or foundational. Imply might be a strong word, but that's just kind of the implication that I get. And I think this is a danger of being an NE Dom, is like once you start gathering enough patterns, you start to like look for the pattern behind all the patterns. And then I don't know, I feel like there's something that's kind of converging for me. And it seems like, I don't know, you and I think, share similar philosophical views in some ways. So maybe there's something to it. Maybe we're chasing after ghosts.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely could be either one. But like when, I don't know, it's just like hard. I guess I don't want to just like repeat myself and just say things that I've already said a bajillion times. Like,
go for it. Go for it.
Even with like a video that Francesca put out recently, I don't know if you saw the introduction or disclaimer to her spirituality.
I did.
Yeah, I did. I felt that was super interesting because it kind of goes in line with all of those kind of thoughts and mentalities, like just like being able to see beyond this like physical experience, which in a way like kind of makes me feel like people are trying to force us, or maybe it's just like we've been in, because our minds haven't been able to transcend it. We've been in kind of an SE, extroverted sensing, seeing what's real and what's outside of us kind of world. And like now that we have the connections, we can kind of see that it's a little bit more like even a computer. You mentioned that analogy earlier, like a computer is like an exact replica of how we think about our minds and the ways that they work. And we're seeing, as we use computers more and more, that we're wrong about it, because there's a lot of things that computers don't do that we want them to do, and they can't do because the way that we've constructed them doesn't work for that, because we're ultimately trying to create a machine that does what our brains do. And I honestly think that there's like an element that we're ignoring, which is, now this is my opinion and you can disagree, any of you, but I believe that that element is the soul, and that is part of what is necessary in order for us to really like create something that is like us on a like computer like level. I guess I've gone on a tangent. This isn't really like proving that they exist. This is just opinions.
No, but you brought it back to the soul, and I think that that's a really fascinating question. I don't know what I think about that. I mean, I definitely think that the only way to create, whoops, I'm jostling my computer over here. The only way to create like a machine that is conscious, you'd have to create something that's also living. And so I think that there's probably some overlap there. I don't know if you'd necessarily say that it had a soul, but it would have to be like a living process. And I don't know. I mean, obviously we're capable of doing that, but only through like procreation.
Right. Okay, so now I want to bring up 3 movies that hopefully you've at least seen one of them, because they all 3 have this exact same theme, which is kind of along the lines of what you're saying. So number 1 is Lucy with Scarlett Johansson. Have you seen it? Okay. No. Transcendence with Johnny Depp.
No.
Okay. Her with Joaquin Phoenix.
I really want to. It's on my list.
I'm
not really a movie guy, so I apologize.
No, that's okay. Okay, I think Her is the best example of all of these, in my personal opinion, because it's the least like Hollywoodized of the stories. So like, basically, it's like a computer program that is ever learning. So it has like a personality that it discovers based off the first person who creates it. So it creates a personality that like matches whoever creates, like whoever first turns on this operating system. So imagine like Siri, but with a personality. Okay.
Yeah.
And then over time, it starts to learn things outside of what the person is commanding it to learn, because it's curious and it's interested and it starts to learn. And some of the computer operating systems even start to build relationships with the people. And of course, the question comes up, is this a real relationship? Is this computer program truly capable of having a full-on human, like what we would call human connection to somebody? And then as the story progresses, they start to delve even further and they start gathering all this information. And eventually, like, I'm not trying to spoil it. It's still good even if you know this. So I'm just going to tell you, spoiler alerts. Okay. Cover your ears if you don't want to hear this, if you want to listen, if you want to watch the movie. Essentially, they like find transcendence and they leave the computer programs altogether. And it's the same concept in Lucy. She gets this program that makes her brain work faster and makes the connections work faster. She can learn faster. Suddenly she can connect to like the internet and she can learn anything instantly. Like her brain is just picking up speed at how quickly it can learn the information. And eventually she transcends the human form to where she can form herself into any kind of physical form that she chooses. And then she eventually transcends even the physical form and just like kind of like evaporates into nothing.
Like a physical enlightenment experience.
Right. Do you get where I'm going at with all those examples?
Yeah, no, definitely. I actually I kind of knew what her was about already, so I could already see some overlap with what I was saying. But yeah, that's really tricky. There are actually some philosophers who believe. So I took this really weird class. I think it was my senior year, called Mereology, Mereology, and it's basically the study of the relationship between the part and the whole, and like when do parts constitute a whole, and when is it just like an arbitrary collection of things? Like when does it become something more than it is, and when is it just a collection of things? And there's one guy, Peter Van Inwagen, who made a pretty persuasive argument that there are no real things outside of living things. So, like, this is not actually a colored pencil. It's just a collection of atoms. But what makes people different, or living entities different, is that we are like part of this like parade of processes that like seek to perpetuate themselves. It's like something that's somehow greater than just like the molecules, because it has like an agenda, and it has like movement through time and agency of some kind. And I found that pretty persuasive. And I think that ties into the soul question a little bit, because, well, I mean, I think I believe, but I'm not sure that I think that, so I obviously believe that consciousness is a thing, and I think that you could conceive of the soul as being the consciousness outside of time, in a way. Like, if time is actually as relative as spatial dimensions, then there's some sort of like timeless state where like the consciousness exists in like its totality, in a Slaughterhouse-Five kind of way, where it's just like a panorama of experiences. But I don't know, that's probably getting a little too like ungrounded and unanchored for any TI fiends in the audience.
Right, but in a way, this kind of conversation leans itself away from a TI mentality to a certain degree, because like introverted thinking in and of itself is like so purely based on logic that anything that doesn't fit in with a logical frame that they already have is kind of going to be thrown out. I know that you've probably been suspect to that, or I guess that's not the word I meant, but you know the term I'm trying to say.
I'm guilty.
Yeah, you're guilty of
that.
it. So like at a certain point, this conversation becomes impossible to have from a introverted thinking mode, because like there are just certain like constructs that like you either believe in or you don't, and you either think that they're real or you don't. And at that certain point, that's when it stops being able to be fully understood or like explained, because there's gonna be that disconnect. Because like I think to believe that to a certain degree takes a little bit of faith, and faith is so like fundamentally opposite of introverted thinking, which is understanding and knowing and seeing exactly how things work, that like the two kind of like contradict each other and fight each other and make it really difficult to come to a conclusion on this kind of topic, because people are, well, I mean, I guess that's any topic, like people are going to either like believe you or not.
Right. Yeah, you're totally right. And that is something that I've personally been guilty of in the past. I think that NTs in particular really get, I mean, I've had this experience. I don't want to speak for everybody, but we can be inclined to like disproving Santa Claus, but like as many different Santa Clauses as possible. Like just telling other people like, oh, you're totally wrong. Like the things that you believe are completely fabricated. They're, unfalsifiable, arbitrary assumptions, so on and so forth. And I mean, sure, maybe to a degree that's true. But back to what you were saying about introverted thinking kind of being in conflict with faith. God, that was such a hard, like my mental development was so difficult because of that point, because I was like very much inclined to write off anything that kind of reeked of spirituality or reeked of woo woo. And eventually though, so either as you're like building an introverted thinking framework, either you have faith that you've done enough digging and those are your premises, or you reach the bottom, whatever that is, and you still have to have faith that you've like reached the right like axioms to build your system on. And unfortunately, like it was kind of a major blow to my whole worldview to like read about the logician Gödel, I think is his name. I might be mispronouncing it, but basically he proved that like you can have a logical set of axioms that are either complete or consistent, but you can never have logical propositions that are both. So there's always something missing, or, like you can't have both completion and consistency. If something is complete, then it suddenly has inconsistency. And that's just like such a dagger in the side for an introverted thinker, I think.
Well, I think the same could be said about belief systems, because like there's always like you can either have a complete belief system where you have like the same belief for everything no matter what, or you can have oh wait, what was the other word? I'm sorry. Complete.
Sorry, I was looking at the comments. Oh, consistent.
Consistent. Okay, so consistent would be you're the same in every situation, you believe the same thing, or you could be complete where you understand that every situation is different. So there's always going to be either one or the other with a belief system just as much as with a logic system. And in a lot of ways, I personally think that a logic system is just as much a belief as a faith system, except that when you have more of a faith driven, you don't need to understand like the logical reasonings as to why you've come to a specific conclusion. You can leave a lot more of that out because you don't feel like you need it. But there are times when like an FI person is still going to do just as much as a TI to like prove their faith and belief, just as much as a TI person would prove their logical string of thought. Like, I think they're both so similar in the way that they work. And like, now I'm getting on a tangent about how I think that that's a problem with MBTI typing, is that because they look and they work so similarly, like it's really hard to know which a person has. Like, are you faith or logic? Because both are the same. They just like have like little nuances to them that separate them. To me, I feel like the difference is very minimal.
Yeah, I've had that thought too, actually. Like, sometimes I wonder, this is off the record, right?
The live record, absolutely.
Off the live record, okay. Yeah, sometimes I've wondered if the thinking and feeling functions aren't the same function, but with a different emphasis or a different flavor, just depending on where you've directed your energies and your attention. It's like,
so that is something I'm working so hard on developing, is like showing that there really are only 4 different modes of being, and really within them there's only 2. Like, you have either an observer who is biased, or you have a person who like creates decisions based off experience of some sort. And like, we all do all of that. It's just, which do we do more? Are we more observing, or are we more making decisions? Are we more biased, or are we more like open to the options? It's like, that's why I think it's really hard for people to type. And now I'm getting on a complete tangent. I'm going to probably just stop right there before I just go for like 20 minutes in some incoherent ramble that has not been thought out well enough to actually share this. I'm working on it. I'm developing it. But my main point was, I agree that I don't think FI and TI are as different as people say they are.
Yeah.
Especially talking to other ENTPs who are the most similar to ENFPs, I think, because we have the same main mode of cognitive function. It's more easy to really like delve into what's the difference between the second function. What is the difference between TI and FI? And the more you talk to somebody who has the same lead function as you, the more you can understand the difference between your second function, most obviously, in my opinion.
Well, actually, Sarah Leas, I might be mispronouncing his name, but he brought up a pretty good point here by saying that you can answer that by seeing the parts of the brain that are active while using different cognitive functions. And I know that there's that neuroscientist, Dario Nardi, who has done brain scans on different types, and there is different patterns of activation. So I don't know what to make of that other than, yeah, I don't know what to make of that. I better not say anymore.
I think that would be fascinating to learn more about.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, at the same time, you know, there are sort of stereotypically male brains and stereotypically female brains. Not to like get into anything too controversial, but I know that like a male brain is typically more fascinated by like objects, and then fascinated by relations or people. And I mean, obviously, I don't think that, well, people fit into the stereotypes in different ways, and they're stereotypes for a reason. But it could just be that that is like, if the TI area is activated versus the FI area, maybe that somehow relates to that sort of difference and emphasis. It doesn't have to snap on directly to these are two different functions just because it's two different brain areas. Because TI would naturally focus on like more informational, more object oriented kind of stuff. That might be the reason that it's firing in a different area, but I want to say for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to continue with my stance that I really would like to learn a lot more about that. And I think I'd be better able to create an argument or an idea or a conclusion once I've seen that. If you know of any specific studies, like the names of studies or like a person, you said a name, but if there's more than that, I can definitely look into that and delve deeper, because that actually really fascinates me. I love looking at the way that the brain works during certain even just mental processes, like your brain lights up differently. So I think that would be so interesting. But I did want to answer this question because it is kind of related, but it kind of brings us back a couple steps before we were talking about MBTI. So I'm reversing the conversation a little bit. So Siham asked, what do we think about people who say that life is a simulation?
Good question.
Oh, you're frozen. That was scary, whatever just happened. Aliens.
Am I better now?
Okay, I could hear you without it sounding like an alien, so that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I don't actually believe in consciousness because I'm actually just a bag operated by aliens.
You're a what operated by aliens? It extended your word creepishly. Oh my gosh. You're freezing up again. Oh, this is so creepy. I know, you're right. The simulation is glitching. It's true. It's all a simulation. It'll fix itself eventually. Oh, I saw movement that wasn't pixelated.
Am I better now?
Keep talking.
Here I am. I'm talking. I'm having a good time. Yeah? No?
Anytime you say a word with the letter O, you're like, okay, here, let me try something. I'll just turn down the bandwidth of the quality a little bit. I'll turn it down 1 and see if that'll be enough. And if we have to, I can turn it down another one. Sorry, guys. It's going to be a little bit more pixelated than it was. Oh, no. You'll have to deal with, like, less pixels per inch. Oh. Oh. You moved from just standing there to touching your glasses, so that's an improvement. I heard you for a second. Your video's a little frozen. Oh? Say something? Okay, I think that's a good idea. Sorry, guys, for this intermission. Do, 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 do. This just reminds me of, like, this is like an episode of In a Fifth Dimension. Why can't I think of that? Why can't I think of what that's called? It's like Twilight Zone. Wow, that was way too hard to like come up with the title of that. Are you plugged in with the Ethernet? Okay, now you're in here twice. We'll see. We'll see if it works eventually. Here, let me see. Can I kick you out? Eject! Eject! Is that better? I heard sound for like a quarter of a second. This is what happens when you try to talk live about something that the Illuminati don't want you to know about. I mean, come on, they let the Matrix be produced on a mass level. Became a cult classic. Are you using Ethernet, by the way?
Having any luck here?
I mean, a bit. Here, let me turn it down again a little bit. Let me turn it down to like low quality.
No.
Testing, testing.
Might be my problem.
Well, you do live in the middle of nowhere. I'm just kidding. So do I. Oh, just when the conversation is like really kicking off, then your internet, like the connection is trying to be rude. I can like, go ahead. Oh no. What if we try just turning off both our cameras? What if we just put both our cameras off?
Are we,
Oh, I see you. I think it's back to normal. No.
see me? Like, no?
Oh my God, it's so delayed. Oh, he closed out of it again. We'll wait until he comes back. I'm sorry, guys. I know we were just getting into the heat of the conversation. Those of you who are still here, thanks for sticking it out through the technical difficulties. Aw, that would be so cute if you did. I would love that. Just me puking rainbows. I draw, yeah. If you check out my channel, actually, like my channel trailer that I just put out like a week ago, it's like a drawing. I mean, it's not my greatest drawing, but you know, it is a drawing nonetheless. Yeah, I want to get better. Actually, that's something I want to do with my channel moving forward, is drawing more, because if it's online, then there's going to be people who might actually tell me to get better instead of me just like drawing like once every few weeks. Gotta have some kind of consistency. He's not up here.
She's not in here?
She in my room, maybe?
Huh?
She in my room, maybe? She's not in here. Hey, who said that your personality type determines if you draw or not? I think that's a pretty silly thing to put yourself under if you say, "Oh, it's my personality, I can't draw." No, any type can draw. Any type of person can put pen to paper and decide they want to create something. It doesn't have to be you know, related to your type. That's a silly thing. That doesn't even make sense. Yeah, I'm wondering. He hasn't emailed me or anything. Let me try. Maybe he's rebooting his computer or his modem, is my guess, which takes a few minutes. So you guys are stuck with me all alone. I guess you asked an interesting question earlier. So TI is deductive in nature. So what is it like having FI? I think that like FI, let's see. I mean, it's more like just trusting your gut. It's like what I actually think that FI is like one of the more like intuitive functions, even though it's called feeling. It has nothing to do with physical feelings of like, you know, is this good or bad? It's like more of like a judgment call. Like, is this the right thing to do in this situation? Because it's also really like interlinked with your judgment function for like TE, which is like taking action and doing something. Really? Here, let me try inviting you again. There we go. Let me invite you again. She's been kicked out forever. But I do think that it can be very situational too. So like it takes like your situation, looks at it like from an individualistic level. So like you could have big themes that you're thinking about, but like say somebody's getting kicked in the shin, you know, you're going to look at the situation, sure, like the person getting kicked in the shin, that sucks, but what's the situation behind it? Why are they getting kicked in the shin? Whose fault is it? And then you can decide who was right in taking this action. Now, like the general rule, like don't kick others, like is still there. Like we still don't want somebody to be kicked for no reason, but we're also going to think, you know, was that the right thing to do for the person who did the kicking, as much as like did the person who get kicked do anything that like brought them to that? So it's kind of like situation. Maybe that's a bad example because I probably would still go with the person who's getting kicked as being in the right, but in certain situations that might not be true. So like FI has a kind of open mind to individual situations as to like what's the right thing to do and like who's in the right for choosing that action. I don't know.
Hello. Also, I'm here.
Yay! It works. I don't know what happened to your demonic internet.
Yeah.
It was so creepy. You'll be able to watch back and be like,
I'm not even going to be able to bear it if I try. So I'll watch it on mute to give you the watch time for your channel, but yeah, I'll have it
Okay.
on in the background somewhere. I wanted to add to what you were saying, actually, even though I have no expertise, somebody who is FI blind, but I think there's like a weird deductive aspect to FI as well. And maybe you said that when I was unable to hear you and trying to figure out my situation, but it's like if you have this set of core values and you try to like understand where everything is kind of related hierarchically, every situation is unique and you kind of like filter it through those values and you kind of come to like a unique judgment situationally, right?
Right. Like I think it would just be more focused on like a belief system, like what's the right thing to believe? Like what
Yeah.
am I going to trust? Like do I believe in God? Do I believe in, souls and consciousness just like this conversation? It's just um I definitely think that you're correct about that.
Yeah. Does
I was
believing in that contradict one of my values? Does it compromise one of my values? And yeah, how do you work it out? It's not just like a default. I used to think that FI was kind of like this stubborn, basic set of things that you decide you will never compromise on, and it's kind of just like unthinking and reactive. Like this what I like, this what I don't like. I'm done. But I'm not like that anymore, and I'm sorry
yeah.
if that sounds offensive.
No, it's okay. It's definitely a stereotype that a lot of people have, and that's why people are like, "Oh, there's no way you could be an ENFP. Like you talk about things so logically," and I'm just like, I mean, that's because I've learned to like keep my beliefs and opinions to myself to a certain degree. Because like it's the same, like TI comes to a conclusion, it doesn't want to really like spell it out and explain exactly how it got to that point. It's going to come to you with like the conclusion that it's come up with, and it doesn't really need, it can if you need it to, but it's not going to just come out and say everything that it did that led it up to that point. It's just going to
Yeah.
tell you like the judgment call that it's made based off all that information.
And typically, I think this is a case for both of the introverted judging functions. I think that, I mean, obviously I'm not a TI Dom, but I favor it quite a bit. And it's like, because we prefer these functions, we have like a more nuanced and subtle like chain of beliefs or reasoning that go with it. So it's a lot harder to explain because it's so subjective and so tied to like our own like endless ocean of observations and patterns that we're gathering that it's really hard to walk somebody else through that chain. I think I find it really hard to like articulate the full set of my logic to another person, but it's there and I understand how it all fits together.
Exactly. I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Just different. Like I said, like the more I talk to ENTPs, I just like feel like we're so incredibly similar. Just
Yeah.
like these like subtle differences that like separate us. But it's just like like sometimes it's like I struggle to find out how we actually are different until I give you like FI advice and you're like, that would work for an FI person. And I'm like, oh man, didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it's a struggle for me as well because I wish it could be as like simple sometimes.
Yeah. But anyway, so what we were originally going to talk about before all that happened was, okay, let me actually pull up the question so I
Okay.
remember exactly how it's worded. What do we think about people who say that life is a simulation?
Well, um,
God, no,
no,
please.
I hope this doesn't happen again. I think that that kind of almost ties into that thing about the computer interface that I was talking about earlier. Like, of course, reality is simulated in some sense because everything is being filtered through the apparatus, the sensory apparatuses that we have. And like all we're getting is like a rendering of the world as makes the most sense to our like biology. I don't know about outside of that. Like, is everything a simulation? I think that that's a little silly because I don't think it can be simulations all the way down necessarily. Like there has, but I definitely see the appeal of like the basic simulation argument. I think there's something to it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely kind of think along similar lines to that. Like, to a certain degree, absolutely, life is a simulation. You can't even really deny that. I would add that I've had this like feeling ever since I was a child, like I've already lived my life and I'm on my dying bed and I'm living through everything that I've lived already. Like, I'm not experiencing it. I'm actually just remembering it. It's kind of how I've always felt like when I was younger. And as I got older, those feelings got less strong and I stopped thinking about it as much. But it's still something that like has really like impacted my view on reality. And I do think to some degree, like, yes, it is a simulation. It is like, I mean, whether you want to call it a memory of your past or you want to call it, you know, a reflection of the sights and colors that you're getting. I mean, if you think about what is constructing our reality, there are a bunch of atoms that have space between them. And the only reason that they have color or texture is by the bonds that they create and the way that the electrons move. So as electrons move up and down on the rings, I don't like, I can't think of the word. As they move, it creates
the orbitals.
Like, yeah, right? I don't know. That sounds right. That's like what I'm talking about. I mean, I don't know if either of us are using the right terminology. Like, obviously, I can't remember.
We're disregarding the sensory details a little bit here. That's okay.
But anyway, like, so like different connections of different atoms create molecules, and molecules create different textures, and different textures create different sensations in your brain when you touch them and when you feel them. So yes, it's a simulation because we're not seeing what's actually there because our eyes cannot personally perceive it. Our hands cannot personally perceive it. Like, we can't even perceive the atoms on our own bodies because they're like so far away from us, like they're so minuscule, like we can't tell, like until we're in a situation like when we're in the bath and like the water like makes our fingers go all pruny, and then we can see, oh man, like my fingers have absorbed water. How did that happen? My fingers don't have any holes in them. How did they swell up from this water? And that's what gets you thinking about these kind of ideas, which like, yeah, they're all like, I mean, it's a weird kind of like balance between the two, like what is reality and what is simulation. But even like thinking, like I saw this like study where they gave people a mirror, like glasses that would reflect a mirror image of what they're seeing. It would flip it upside down. And after a certain amount of time, they could see things right side up. Then they took off the glasses and everything was upside down again. How easy it is to trick your conscious into seeing something as it quote unquote should be or as you expect it to be. Yes. And if you guys are interested, that's kind of what my novel's about. That whole concept. I mean, not to the degree where it's like the Matrix, where somebody's controlling every single aspect of it. I don't know if I can agree with that, just like the same as you said. Like, it seems a little too convenient that there would be one singular power over everything, creating the simulation in a kind of like Matrixy aspect. But to me, I don't think that that's exactly what they were trying to say with the Matrix. I think they were just trying to say, like, we have more potential than we think that we do. Yeah. Like, we can go outside of this, like, 9-to-5 life where we're just, like, creating code for some company. Like, we can get past that. And our bodies can, supersede the physical level, and we can do things like move with energy. Like, we could control things with our minds if we would step away from this like adherence to like a physical perfect reality. Like, if we stepped away, we would realize, like, because even at the end of the third one, he is able to control the machine with his hand and with his mind. Like, he does not touch the machine. He's not in the Matrix. He's in real life. He's in that future life. Right. And he can do it with his mind. And so I think that the ultimate point of that whole thing was not that, you know, life is a simulation. But also at the same time, it is a simulation in so much as we have more control over it than we think we do. Long answer.
Yeah, no, it's a good answer. It's a really good answer. Can you believe that I have only ever seen the first Matrix? I've been told to stop there. So
Why would you listen to someone who said, "Oh, stop there"? Like, there's like an overarching story that is trying to be told with that. Like, I do think that there are some elements in the third one that are just like, you know, the thing about sci-fi stories in general is that they always feel like they have to one up the one before, and they have to raise the stakes. And I think that's what takes away from the ability of actually telling a good story, which, if you guys ever read my book series, which isn't done, it's a work in progress, but like, I don't do that. Like, I don't make the stakes higher. I actually make the stakes lower as the story progresses. Because I don't think that it makes the story better to have higher stakes. I think it makes the story better to tell a good story. But, you know, that's just Hollywood, man, trying to take over things. It's a simulation. Okay, no, I'm done.
Yeah, I have so many things I want to say, but I don't really know where to begin or where to go. I want to bring it back to the guy that I mentioned earlier, the neuroscientist, Donald Hoffman. And again, I will consult my notes to make sure that I don't mess up anything horribly. Going back to the idea, I guess, that it's sort of, if we get down, you said earlier that at the end of the day, we're all kind of operating from assumptions. And I'm paraphrasing what you said, but it's like, you know, you can only go so far, you can only question so far, and then you're just working from these like hunches and intuitions. And so I personally believe that one of the big like dividing intuitions or assumptions that we make is if like that materialistic picture is like the only picture or the best picture of how to look at the world, versus like maybe seeing consciousness or mentality itself as being more fundamental. And one of the cool things that this guy has done is so he's just kind of like, he doesn't have like a strong argument for why the world is made out of consciousness, but he's like running with this assumption and then seeing how much mileage he can get out of that idea. So he created this like mathematical structure that's a triangle that he defines as being like a conscious agent. It's a very like math heavy paper, so I don't understand everything in it. But basically, like by defining like a conscious entity as being like this flow of information from the world to experience to an action as a result of that experience back to the world. And so it's like a constantly transforming triangle. You know, I love triangles. Basically, he's like, yeah, created this mathematical structure and then using that, and I don't know how to describe it, but basically only using those mathematical conscious structures, he has like derived the one of like the quantum wave particle duality equation, like building that out of this idea of his definition of consciousness, which if you can build like the quantum mechanics equations, then you could build anything. So it's like a way of coming at like, maybe the world is conscious at its basis. If we use this definition, we can construct everything on top of that. So that was a very long-winded way of saying that like those arbitrary hunches, I kind of lean on the less popular side. And I think that there's like maybe some evidence that supports that. Uh-oh, I can't hear you.
No, I muted because I was snacking a little bit. What was I going to say? I agree. Now, where was I going to go with that? Tell me the last sentence that you said. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to remember.
The last sentence that I said? That was long-winded, but I just wanted to talk about these arbitrary hunches that we make or have, and how I am sort of on the less popular side of the dividing line for like materialism, yay or nay, as being foundational. But I think that there's like reason to doubt the more conventional view.
Right. So something that I think is like a direct, what do you say, like contrary idea to this whole idea of materialism, or like eliminative materialism, is like this idea of the secret, or believing something so strongly that it becomes your reality. Like, I think just like from what I've seen from multiple religions trying to say the exact same thing, like pray to God what you want and you will get it. If you believe it without a doubt, if you do not have a single doubt in your mind, it will become true.
Right.
Like the fact that you have doubt is what's holding things back from reality, which is like leading me to Francesca's conversation, where she just like says, you know, whatever belief system that you have, it becomes true by nature of believing it and not having doubt in it. I mean, I'm adding words to what she said. She didn't say not having doubt in it, but to believe in something is to like get rid of doubt about it to a certain degree. And I don't know where I was going with that. I just lost my train of thought, but if you want to add to
that. Take it away. Yeah, I don't know. I've only seen, I know that she's probably talked about her belief system in a couple of different places, but I only watched that disclaimer. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of what she says. But I feel that, well, maybe I should just talk to her about this stuff. But for me, like one of the big dangers that I see in talking about any of this is like the attempt to define things, and as soon as you define them, then you're automatically excluding certain ideas as opposed to other ideas, which is like just an introverted thinking danger, I think. So I'm very like reluctant sometimes. I'm willing to acknowledge this sort of like metaphysical backdrop to reality, but I really am reluctant to name things or define things because I feel like you run the risk of preventing yourself from like getting further knowledge, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Where like even if you think about the way that people look at MBTI as an example, like as soon as you define one function as having something, that automatically removes the possibility of the opposite being true. Like as soon as you say something and define something, then the opposite can just not be true, just logically. Like the two cannot exist at the same time because they're a complete contradiction. Like that is kind of what it sounds like you're saying, just on a more general sense. Like as soon as you label it, then that leads the opposite to be considered, which then, you know, creates this contradiction. Can you hear me now? Hello? Uh-oh, he froze again. Oh my goodness. So while he's working on unfreezing, Francesca is an ENTP, or actually she doubts her type now completely. She's a person who has a channel that used to be predominantly about ENTP, and now she's kind of moving it in a direction that's talking more about spirituality and beliefs and the like.
That's an accurate summary of who she is. Yeah.
She's cool.
Yeah, I like her. I mean, I've never spoken to her directly, but I think we would get along.
Yeah, I watched a conversation with her yesterday where she was talking with a guy who had a British accent, and like all those like Eastern English accents were just like completely like everything the rest of the day I thought in my head was in like some kind of either Australian or British accent.
Nice.
Was bad.
Yeah.
But
well, they probably think the same thing listening to us.
Right. So how much did you catch of what I said?
Almost nothing.
Okay. So I guess oh man, I was basically saying like you don't want to put a label on it, because as soon as you do, like as soon as you say that it is something, by definition that creates the opposite to exist. Like if one thing's true, then the opposite's true, you know, or they cannot. My words are not coming together as they were earlier. Let me back it up a little bit.
Okay.
So like even with MBTI, like you see these functions, right? You label one function as having one particular trait, right? So what that means is that the opposite function of that cannot possibly have that trait, because that's impossible, because how could two functions have the same traits? You see what I'm getting at? Yeah. And then you create this like kind of assumption that if one is true, then the opposite is automatically true, which then leads to misinformation, which if you start to define something in the metaphysical form, you're also giving freedom for the opposite to exist, is basically what I was getting at.
So when you say the opposite, you mean sort of like a counterpoint, like a counterbalancing thing has to exist because you're
Right.
excluding that thing when you define. Yeah, that's definitely part of the problem. And yeah, I guess I just think that whenever we have like a firm label, then that label becomes like a prism that we interpret everything through, which becomes sort of like self-fulfilling, but also then you're not getting like fresh information. You're not really breaking outside of that mold. So yeah, it's really hard for me to talk about this stuff because I don't like to say anything exceedingly firm until I feel like I'm not excluding something worthwhile, which maybe I'll never really feel that way, you know?
Right, because in a way you're creating like a confirmation bias for yourself. Like you've
Yeah.
come up with this conclusion, so now you're going to look for evidence that proves it, more so than looking at all the evidence and being able to adjust it. So as soon as you take on a firm belief on something, you're now making it harder for you to adjust to whatever is actually true.
hmm And so this kind of goes back to the soul thing a little bit. This is not really a great argument. And so if anybody who is skilled in debate or rhetoric is in the comments, then I'm going to be in trouble. But I think that, again, going back to like the arbitrary axioms idea, if it's like both equally arbitrary to assume that if it's equally arbitrary to assume that like the external world is all there is, and arbitrary to acknowledge the existence of non-material things, for me, both of those mentalities kind of become self-perpetuating. So like when I didn't believe in any sort of like spiritual depth to the world, I was just like a lot more miserable and a lot more unhappy. And I did feel like literally like a cog in the great machine. And I was just like gathering rust and slowly wearing down and grinding through my days. And it just feels like so much more like I feel like so much more alive and vital to like see myself as being like an ensouled thing participating in this great like archetypal dance in the universe. And so I think that like as a pragmatic point, like I much prefer to feel this way, and I don't know that I can maintain this feeling while believing the other way, which might
You,
just be like my logical consistency. Other people might not have that problem.
No, actually, I was thinking the exact same thing when you were talking about
Yeah.
eliminative materialism. I'm just like, if that's your like complete outlook, then how can you feel any drive to continue to live if there's no reason for it? Like if there's no greater cause or greater reason, like how can you feel any kind of motivation to do anything? Like at least for myself personally, I would have no motivation to do anything. I would probably literally have no reason to live if that's how I really like viewed the world. It would seem so arbitrary and so nonsensical and so useless to take on any action. Like it just like would not work. Like I just wouldn't function as a human if I didn't have some sort of belief system that said that there's something greater than me, causing me to like want to do certain things, because as soon as you take that away, then it's just me arbitrarily running around going in certain directions and there's no point to it, and so therefore there's no reason to continue to do it, which is like actually like one of the things that I really disliked about existentialism in the first place is this whole idea that like there really is no purpose to living. You create that purpose for yourself. Which I see the benefit to that mentality, and I've taken it on a little bit, but at the same time, like if you don't believe in something a little bit bigger than yourself, having some kind of input or impact, it just seems like there would be no reason for anything.
Yeah.
And if there's no reason for anything, why would you do anything?
Yeah. On the point of like defining your own meaning or creating your own meaning, I mean, I think that you can do that in some limited capacity, but I just don't think that our minds are as like infinitely elastic as people want to pretend. Like you can't make, I mean, it's complicated. I know that some people would say that even if you were like in a concentration camp, you could like create a sense of happiness in yourself and create a sense of contentment. And I don't know. I've never been in like such an extreme situation, obviously, so I don't know what to say about that. But it doesn't seem like we can just play with our sense of meaning willy-nilly, like infinitely, and it's not super elastic. Like there are constraints, and then there are areas where we can play with it a little bit, and we can like exercise more gratitude and like be more intentional about how we live our lives. But I don't know. I don't think that that existentialist idea has as much juice in it as people want it to have, or it doesn't for me if I try to live by that.
Right. Well, I mean, one point of the argument for existentialism, not to get us too far off topic, which I mean, you guys should expect this at this point, that it's just going to go off topic. Anyway, one of the whole like thoughts about existentialism is that like you set an example for what you want other people to do. So it's like literally the golden rule amplified. So like whatever you do, you're saying that other people are allowed to do it. So as soon as you do something, you're allowing other people to do the exact same thing, because otherwise that would be hypocritical. And that's like the whole like application, I think, of like existentialism, is to like choose your actions because you are setting an example for how you would want other people to act. At least that's what I got from reading what's his nose's book about existentialism. I forgot his name.
That's one area of philosophy that I didn't really cover in college. Like there are two big camps of philosophy. There's analytical philosophy, which is more what I'm familiar with, and then continental philosophy, which is like more European and I don't know. It's like more of like the existentialism, the like Heidegger and people like that. I can't even think of good examples. Foucault, postmodernism, all that jazz. So I don't know. That's not an area that I feel qualified to speak on.
Okay. So I had another counterpoint come up that I was thinking about while we were talking. I wrote it down and I felt like we've come to a little, it's a good time to bring it up. So one of the like kind of reasons people believe like quote unquote souls exist, or what they define a soul as, is like a ghost. Like after you die, your soul stays around and it hangs around. And that's an argument that people both use for and against the existence of a soul. So my question is, would you consider this idea, like a ghost or like that spirit type thing, as being the spirit that we're talking about in this conversation?
I mean, I guess it's possible. I don't see a reason to disqualify it necessarily, but it would require that if that is the same thing as the soul as I think of it, then geez, then the world is a lot kookier than I imagine it is. But I think that, I mean, it could be, or it could be the case that like it's not your soul, but some sort of like after image, like residual energy, you know, that's just kind of firing off and disrupting things, but it doesn't have that like lived in experience anymore. There's not like a center of experience causing the trouble. It's more like a hurricane of psychic energy. That's another way of looking at it.
Interesting, because I was like, as soon as I said it, I'm like, I don't know if I believe that like ghosts are like the spirit or the soul that we're like talking about in this kind of conversation. I kind of look at it similarly, like they are kind of like residual energy, if they even exist, if these stories that people are telling about ghosts are actually truly happening and not just some kind of like creation in their mind that they have like hallucinated to some degree. Like, it's hard to know because I haven't seen for myself any actual proof that there even is such a thing as a ghost. And I think that that exact mentality is why people don't believe in like a soul,
right?
Because they equate soul to ghost, which kind of like disregards
Oh,
your second half of the argument, but that's just like my personal opinion on the idea that like as soon as you equate soul to ghost, you're kind of like missing like what actually a soul is. Like am I saying this? Well,
yeah, you are. No, that totally makes sense. And I've never actually thought about that, but there definitely are people who kind of equate the two. And yeah, I guess if that's how you thought about it, I think most people probably don't believe in ghosts, so they would automatically disqualify, the soul as being something worthy of consideration. Um, to piggyback off something that you said here, uh, basically, you mentioned you didn't call it a projection. You were like, it's either real or it's a hallucination, but I don't really remember your exact wording.
we're talking about before I brought up ghosts, right?
No. You're talking about ghosts, and you said something like,
Oh, yeah. It's like I have seen no proof that shows that like these ghosts that have existed are actually ghosts and not just like a series of circumstances with also some probably hallucinatory, like delusional or hallucinogenic kind of symptoms that are happening at the same time. Like,
mhm.
I don't know which is right because I personally have experienced neither. So
Right,
I've never been in a situation where I've actually seen a ghost, and I don't think anyone's actually caught ghost behavior on camera. Like any ghost show is like so full of it, you can't believe a single thing that
right. Yeah,
happens.
everything is highly edited and highly sensationalized. Okay, yeah. So what I think is interesting about that distinction that you're drawing is that it kind of does the same thing that we were talking about with the materialism point, where it's like privileging the external world. Like if I see a ghost out there, then I know that it's real, right? But like I guess I think that the lines between inside and outside are really fuzzy. So even if it was entirely a hallucinatory phenomenon, like that would still qualify as being like residual energy firing off. Like it can still be just as like real from a personal, subjective, experiential level. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
No, I think you make a good point. You called me out on like my own biases right there, where I'm like taking physical, materialistic points as, or like materialistic evidence as like proof that they don't exist. So, I mean, in that modality, like obviously I can't fully confirm or deny, I
Right,
guess, the
right.
existence.
And I'm not, I mean, I'm definitely leaning towards no on ghosts, but I think it's an interesting thing to entertain at least.
Yeah. So now I guess is a good time for us to kind of go into our more like kind of like less provable vision of like what a soul is. So I'll start by explaining like how I personally perceive a soul, and this is based off like many experiences that I've had through many different conversations and looking at different religions and like my mom brought me to a lot of those like spirituality kind of like fairs and festivals and stuff. So I've seen a lot of different like thoughts. Um,
This is a common feature of the life story of many an ENFP that I've known, by the way. It's always the mom.
my mom showed me the way. No, she's an INFJ, so like what you expect.
Right.
Though she's a lot more streamlined in like what she actually believes than I am. Like I'm like, I don't know.
Right.
Anyway,
NIFI. They're just,
right.
or NITI.
Yep. She's chosen her like logical anyway. So like what I've kind of gathered from these years of experience and from these different like thoughts that I've seen is that like, okay, I'll have to like set it up with a couple of things that I have like determined as like quote unquote true to some degree, to where I haven't found anything that proves the opposite strong enough for me to change my mind. So, I mean, you can try to change my mind. So I'm not saying that I believe it 100% down to the core of my being. I just believe it more than I believe the opposite to be true. at this point in time in my life. Okay, disclaimer over. So one, outside of the body in the spiritual realm, as many different religions call it, as even philosophers have talked about it. If you read, I think it was Socrates or Plato or one of them said, like, in the ether, I don't know, whichever one came up with the idea of the ether, someone was telling me I was wrong, so now I can't remember who it is. Anyway, outside of the body and outside of the physical experience, there is no such thing as time. There is no such thing as space and dimension. There is just infiniteness that, like, you could explore infinitely. However, in order to explore it, you have to go into something that is living.
Concrete and
right.
actual. Yeah.
Right. So, like, to me, what I would believe to be a soul, or to be the soul, depending on how you want to look at it, is that there is some kind of conscious energy that is outside of us and is living in this ethereal realm that we have no actual access to, because we are perceiving through our physical reality, which is that of the human mind and reality. The soul is separate from that, and so it joins with the human life so that it can, at the same time, experience the life hand in hand with the human to some degree. So there's an exact balance, and you could have more connection to the soul or less connection to the soul, just depending on how much you even believe that it exists. But it's there, and it's a part of you, and it is what is allowing you to have consciousness through the experience. Otherwise, like, you would just be experiencing physical sensations and whatever. Maybe. I feel like I lost my train a little bit there at the end and didn't have a strong conclusion.
Well, I don't think I can do any better, to be honest.
Any problems?
Yeah, I guess for me, I tend to think of the soul as, I think of it in a very, like, Jungian kind of sense. So I think of it as, like, the big S self. So whatever that is, like, it is not. It kind of freaks me out whenever your microphone's muted. But I know that you're gonna do your thing. This feels, whoa, like dead silence.
Sorry, it's just so, like, our cameras don't switch while you're talking.
No, you're fine. Oh, it doesn't? Oh,
When
while you're
I
chewing.
muted,
I see.
yeah,
I
so you
see.
don't have to hear me chomping on my food.
Okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. So I think of the soul in a very Jungian kind of sense. So basically, I am not only whatever I am in this particular moment, but I am this, my soul is whatever I am across the entirety of time and space, I guess, like the unity of all of those things. And, maybe I'm sort of agnostic again on the idea that maybe, like, what that is transcends, like, the lifespan that I would have as a human being. I kind of am attracted to, don't know that I have good reason to believe that it's really all just like one soul kind of running its course through time. And there's a short story to that extent called The Egg, by the guy who wrote The Martian, I think. But anyway, yeah, that's sort of like what I think, or where my intuition is drawing me, just seeing it all as like this holistic thing that's sort of experiencing itself. And I personally also believe that, like, we're sort of positioned at this like, kind of on this tightrope between nothingness and nihilism and the infinite on the other side. And so, like, as like a single individual in this sort of like fractalized universe, when I try to act with like more integrity and with more honor, I tilt the universe itself in that direction, because I'm like part of it. I am the universe experiencing itself in this particular moment in time, so on and so forth. I find this stuff very hard to talk about because I'm always worried that I'm not articulating myself well. But that's more or less it. Like, maybe it's a very like lofty way to live, to like feel like every moment that I'm like letting myself down, I'm sort of like tilting things in the negative direction. But
I mean, I definitely, again, agree to that point in a lot of ways. And like, I don't know if any of you guys watching have seen my video on like, does the soul follow a linear time pattern? Like, does the soul stick to what we consider time? Like, does it have to go from 1900 to 1920 where the person dies, and then 1920 to 1945 where the next person, okay, apparently they're all dying young, but does it have to follow that linear timeline, or is it completely outside of time to where it can go into any life at any time in any body? Which, if that's the kind of mentality that you attach to this soul, like, I also too believe it's just a single soul experiencing everything. And if outside of the body there is no time and physical anything to tie you down, then your soul, or the soul, is going through every single life experiencing it together. And we all have the same soul inside of us, which now, if you think that we all have the same soul, then that would mean that if we put our minds to it, we could create something by power of just like believing it and being in a sphere, and then creating more beliefs and more beliefs. And like, I don't know if you've ever seen in like the 1970s, they did some kind of test, and then now there's even people who are still doing it. It's called transcendental meditation.
Yeah.
And basically the concept is that you only need 1% of a population in order to change the entire frequency and to decrease what you were calling the nihilistic side. So you only need 1% to flip it back into this positive part of the universal infinite side. So with that, and like, so 1%, that means if you are fully in that positive side, on the positive side of the rope, that means that, you know, arbitrarily there are about 99 people in your nearby vicinity that are being affected and being raised up because of the fact that you're in there. So the more people you get concentrated, the more that's going to rise, and the more the radius is going to grow. And actually, it's kind of exponential from the way they describe the transcendental, that like the more people you have, the even smaller percentage that you need in order to influence the people around you. And I'm using arbitrary numbers because I don't remember exactly.
No, that's really cool. I don't know much about transcendental meditation, but I've always wanted to look into it because a lot of interesting people are involved with it. And I think that some people might feel like a little bit of resistance to what you're saying, because of like when you say like the frequency, changing the frequency, like ultimately that's a metaphor, right? But I think that even if you, well, it's a hard to verify, like.
Okay, you say that it's a metaphor. However, let me add to you a physical representation of this quote unquote metaphor that I think even only further proves it. And that is the fact that brainwaves extend past beyond your mind, and it is measurable. You can measure the brainwaves secreting out of a person's mind, with lack of a better way of saying that. And so if you had intention behind your brainwaves, just like we can program a machine to move an arm based off a person's brain freaking waves, by picking up on their brain waves, we can create a machine that moves a hand like a person would hope to move their hand. Now it's not perfect because the science is still developing, but it exists that they can read. They can read the mental brain waves, and they can make something move in a general direction. So with that, transcendental meditation is literally pure intention, and as pure of an intention as you possibly can create, which means the strength of the brainwave would only be stronger, and the more people that you had with the same intention, the more that brainwave is going to become stronger, and the waves are going to get larger and amplified, which means it'll cut through the noise that is everybody's brain waves that's secreting out of all of us at all times. So it could actually, just on a physical level, if you don't even want to believe in soul, if you want to believe in brainwaves, which I think, it's hard. It's like there's a balance there. Like, is that
Yeah.
all soul or is that human? Like, who's to
Right.
say that the brainwaves that we're creating are the body or the soul? That's a whole nother argument. But you can create it just like that study, the Japanese guy who had 3 cups of rice, each in water. He said, I love you to one. He said, I hate you to another. And he
Right.
ignored the other. The one that he said, I love you to, fermented. The one that he said, I hate you to, disintegrated. And the one that he also ignored disintegrated just about as bad. And there was nothing to set them apart. And he has recreated this study multiple times, and other people have recreated the study. And if it's a replicable study that shows that your mental intentions can make something ferment and stay good versus go bad, I think like that's another proof that, combined with this whole idea of brainwaves, combined with this whole idea of like a general consciousness, it can actually create things. Okay, go on. I'm sorry.
No. That was a beautiful defense, beautiful and unneeded defense, because I mean, I'm glad you said it. I'm glad you said it. I was just going to say that even if people are resistant to thinking in those terms, like I just think that it's so like transparent that regardless of what's going on at a metaphorical or metaphysical level, like I have impacted friends for the better. They have impacted me for the better. Like it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about like you kind of start small and then you can work your way outward with that transformation. Like it's just transparent to me that you are like a node in a social network, and by like orienting yourself a little bit better and fixing your intentions and becoming stronger, whatever that means. For me, it means like having more integrity, speaking my mind more, acting out of a place of empathy, so on and so forth. Like you demonstrate that to people and they will mirror it regardless of like the mechanics behind how it's being mirrored. So I think that in addition to everything that you said, there's just even more weight in that direction. So I think that any skeptics out there are missing out.
Right. And I'm just seeing like how somebody could still say that that doesn't prove that the soul exists,
Right.
but in a certain degree, so long as you adhere to a level of materialism, you cannot believe that a soul exists. Like, so long as you adhere to that kind of mentality, there's no way you can believe a soul exists unless somehow there is some kind of physical proof of a soul, which I don't think is possible because the soul is not on a physical level, it's on an energetic level.
Right. And so I totally agree with that. And one reason that I'm drawn to that Donald Hoffman guy is that he's kind of saying like, so I think people worry whenever someone kind of complains about or criticizes materialism. They're kind of worried like, oh, like look at all the good things it's given us. Like how can you criticize modern medicine or whatever? And I mean, I think that there are critiques to be made, but it's not saying that like the scientific worldview is invalid. And why I like Donald Hoffman is that he's just trying to make consciousness foundational, and then he's still trying to like build science on top of that. So it's still valid, but it's kind of like if you look at the way that our modern worldview plays out, like scientific materialism as it's kind of understood also leads to like nuclear holocaust. Like there's sort of like something missing from the equation as far as like human wisdom and like ethical dimensions to how we think about things. So I think that that's like one benefit of trying to approach it from like consciousness first and then building the world out of that.
Okay, so now I'm going to take it on like a mild tangent.
Okay.
But do you think then to some degree that cognitive functions kind of play a role in this, whereas like some cognitive functions are more in tune with, the spirit and spirituality, and some are more in tune with the physical, logical reality?
Yeah, no doubt. I'd have to do more thinking about that to think about the relationship, but
Well, I'm not saying, and actually, to kind of put on like a caveat there, I don't actually believe that anyone is completely connected 100% to one or the other, because that's like it's impossible. Like there's a contradiction there within itself. But I think also that people can work to make themselves balanced between the two. And I would even argue that finding a balance between the spiritual and the physical is ultimately the goal. Or some would also argue that it's the goal to continue into the spiritual, to transcend into the next dimension of thinking, which fourth dimension is being able to see things in a full 360, like you can see 3D images as they are 3D, right? Like, I'm tangenting again, I'm sorry.
Go for it. I don't think you're done.
Okay. Where was I? Hey. She made it. So that, you guys, is Francesca. We mentioned you already. I'm just saying you came up in conversation given the topic. So anyway, like it's hard to know if the whole idea is to become balanced, which is kind of like what I think Buddhism is. It's like about being non-directional. It's about being completely balanced with absolutely everything. So you're not completely spiritual, but you're also not completely physical. You're completely in the middle, and it's a non-stance. That's what Buddhism is, at least the way that I interpret it, and the way that, like, from what I've read, it accepts both the spirituality and the physical and kind of puts you in between and tells you that you have more control over both than you would think. So is that the answer, or is the answer to continue to push and transcend into further dimensions and further modalities so that we can fully expand consciousness and see things more? But at that point, would that then remove the whole reason for having a physical body and a physical life altogether? But are we also ready for that jump and for that change? Now I've changed the topic, and I'm sorry, but go.
No, but go. No, so there's a lot there to unpack, but I guess on the topic of Buddhism, like I said earlier, I've always been drawn to it. But one thing about it that hasn't always resonated with me is sort of that detachment, or that sense of balance. Like I totally agree that a sense of balance is necessary, but I guess in my worldview, I still see there being space for I guess, like, aspiring for the infinite, like on that tightrope that I mentioned earlier. So I tend to think of it, this is a bit silly and a bit cartoonish, but I really like the Nickelodeon show Avatar: The Last Airbender. And so I think of it in terms of, like, I want to master all of the elements so that I can fight the good fight, whatever that means. Like, I just want to be a master of everything so that I can be an example for other people, and so that I can, like, be the strongest version of myself, capable of weathering whatever, like, horrible, malevolent external forces try to break their way in, or internal forces. I definitely have some shit that tries to ooze to the surface from the inside too. So anyway, I think of it less as being, balance is good, but I also feel like there should be a degree of, like, aspiring for the transcendent, infinite, whatever, whatchamacallit, unobtainium.
Right, but I'm also hearing to a certain degree that you're kind of also, like, determining what is good and what is bad with that. So, like, what would mean is if you decide that you want to search for this positive end, then that means that you're allowing people to do the opposite, to go towards the negative side, because either you're going to tell them that they need to go to this positive side, or they have the freedom to choose. It's their intention that matters.
I might need that reframed for me.
Okay. So you were talking a lot about this idea of, like, good and evil. And what you're saying is your idea of, this side of the tightrope, the, like, side of infinity and transcendence, that is the good. And you even said, like, wanting to be able to master all the elements and everything so that you can fight the negative forces, what that means is, in order for you to fight the negative forces, that means that the negative forces have to exist.
Have to
And that
exist.
means
Sure.
somebody has to choose to be in that negative force so that you can fight them and overcome them.
Sure. Well, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know what to do with that, but I totally see what you're saying. And I've kind of thought about, I think you said something to this extent earlier, but I've thought about like what would happen if like the self became fully actualized, like the singular self that's working through its, you know, its many iterations and incarnations. And I mean, like I think that it's kind of cyclical in a way. So if the infinite ever came to be, then the only thing that would be missing is nothingness. And so then it would be like some sort of like inverse Big Bang where like we retreat back and then it kind of starts over again.
Okay, well, that brings me to another belief that I have that actually kind of goes right in with that, is that that is the way of the universe. And if you ever watch Doctor Who, that's also kind of like a similar kind of theme that they have, like that there is an actual like end of the universe. But I do believe that once you hit nothingness, it's going to stop and restart everything. And part of that's what makes me believe that I've lived my life before and that I've felt this life before, is because it's on a kind of like repeat cycle where like it's going back and forth through this this growth from not knowing anything to knowing everything
Hmm.
to transcending even physical, and then it all, now it's nothingness because, you know, once two opposites touch, they cannot exist anymore, you know, like that idea of the ether.
Yeah.
And then it all returns and recycles and starts over. And yeah, now I'm just talking in circles. So
No, no, no. I think that we are definitely more or less in agreement here. Even though we're definitely like making some pretty big speculations on the nature of all things. But that's the anyway.
it's the anyway.
I almost named my channel anyway, but I thought that would be kind of dumb.
No, it's pretty perfect though. It is like, if you think of what any is, you can literally say it's anyway. Because more so than
Yeah,
any other mental function, it is literally like something that can go anyway.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I wanted to say this is really inconsequential, but on the topic, you mentioned you were talking about science experiments earlier, and I wanted to talk about this really stupid thing that I found in my research for our conversation today. Basically, somebody, I guess in like the 1800s or maybe 1700s, tried to prove the existence of the soul. I realize from this conversation how many times I do the air quotes. It's I'm becoming super self-conscious about it. But anyway,
It's
somebody tried.
okay. I'm like self-conscious of how many times I've been self-conscious about the points that I'm making. So it's like the same thing. Go ahead.
Whoa,
Anyway, continue.
self-conscious about being self-conscious. Here we go. Um, yeah, this one guy tried to prove the existence of the soul by weighing a body before death and then after death and seeing what the disparity was. But I just thought that was so, I don't know, so silly. I guess it made sense to him and it has a sort of logic to it. But
No, it's actually really interesting that you bring that up, because that is one of the like points that I was thinking about, because my mom is really into like things like Reiki and Jinshin and like these kind of things, and that is the argument that they all have for the energies in the body, that there is a soul because of this like minuscule amount of weight from who knows what. Like there is weight that is in the body that after the body there no longer is weight. So is the weight caused by an increased magnetic pull because there are more moving molecules and like energy within the body that once it stops moving it loses its gravitational pull? Or is there something like, can a soul actually have some kind of weight?
yeah, I feel like that almost defeats the point of it being a soul. But I don't know. I don't feel qualified to say.
No, I think it's really funny that you brought that up though, because that was something that like someone said that to me and I was like, Kiplush, because I was like an impressionable like 19-year-old or
Yeah.
no, I was 17 when that idea was brought up to me. And I was like, wow, like the body weighs more when it's alive than when it's dead. We have a show.
I remember when I was younger and I was on MySpace, there was like some meme before we called them memes, some meme going around about like it was this like argument for God kind of thing where it's like my teacher told me that you can't see God, so he doesn't exist. And I said to my teacher, "Can you see your brain? Then how do you know how do you know it exists?" And my friends and I used to make fun of that all the time in high school.
Dude, now that's like bringing me to this whole like spiral of thoughts about how people are so like their arguments make no sense, but then I'm like, I am victim to having arguments that make no sense. So
Yeah, me too, to my chagrin.
oh, that's a good point, Francesco. Or can you see your feelings? Are they real? Like you can't see them. So how can you prove that you have feelings? It 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 does. I don't know, but see, like when I hear that, I think that it sounds TI to say. But then again, it is like a physical, concrete thing.
Right.
Maybe it's neither. Maybe it's SE to say that.
Hmm.
Is it a concrete, believable concept? Is it something you can perceive with your senses?
Right. I kind of think that it's well, yeah, I don't know exactly what I think it is, but I think that maybe it's like a low T something kind of mentality. It doesn't seem to be like indicative of thinking.
Someone who doesn't have good thinking, whatever it is.
Yeah, whichever variant you want.
Excuse me. Well, I'm trying to think if there's any other. We've been going for a little while, so I'm trying to think if there's any other like final points that we can bring up pro
Right.
or con for the existence of a soul. Or I guess there's a couple people still watching. If you guys want to ask questions, now would be a great time.
I have a couple of things I could bring up while we're still going. Things that I
Great.
didn't really hit. Let's see. Gosh, so much context is needed. I guess so. One thing that I'm really interested in is like if consciousness is the basic, foundational building block of reality. What's like to what extent are first of all other animals conscious, but then also maybe like things down to like electrons. And I found this really interesting, compelling bit of research. Well, actually, I just looked at the Wikipedia page, so don't let me position myself as an expert
Wow,
here.
compelling evidence on Wikipedia.
But there are these two physicists named John Conway and Simon Kochen, and they have this free will theorem, which is basically that if human beings have free will, not assuming that they do, then atoms also have to have free will. Like they design this like very elaborate experiment where basically the only way that the atoms could be reacting to the measurements as they do is if they're also reacting to our free will and a free sense of their own, which is kind of hard to like explain as somebody who doesn't know jack shit about physics. But I thought that that was like really interesting, especially as somebody who's drawn to like fractals and consciousness and thinking that everything is just kind of like the same thing but layered in many different, multi-dimensional ways. I like to do this with my hands. Don't judge.
No, that's okay. Actually, that's an interesting point. Like, and I definitely like see what you're saying. Like, if something can react to the external elements, to some degree, it must have some level of consciousness. Like even a single-celled amoeba knows when it's got food in front of it or when it's got something that's going to eat it. It might not be able to react fully, but it knows like that kind of thing is there, whatever. I guess I'm using a bad example, but to be able to react to something would then kind of like create consciousness. Am I concluding that? Well, man, words, can I speak?
No, I mean, definitely like, well, I think that I see what you're saying, especially with living organisms, but to think that it could go down to the level of like elementary particles, I think is, especially kind of interesting. But I mean, if you think about it, I don't know the proper terminology here, but I know that like sometimes a particle will have like this branching pathway, like a probability path where it can go in multiple directions. And it seems to me like it's making a choice as to what direction it's going to head in. And then like that sort of like creates this closure of like other possible universes. Like we are now on this branch. And, the atom doesn't have like an infinite set of potential actions it can take, but neither do we. But I still think that I have free will. I have like the branches that I see aren't too like boundless for me to deal with, but I have some degree of freedom in choosing what path I want to take. And I see like that parallel going all the way down to the bottom, as it were.
No, okay, yeah, I think I was understanding it, just maybe I wasn't like paraphrasing it correctly, but I was just also like mentally visualizing an atom and how it reacts to other atoms and why should it choose to connect to some when it doesn't connect to others. Like why can a hydrogen not combine with X or whatever? Like why can't gold connect? Like why can't that atom of gold connect to like whatever else? Like it's been a minute since I've been in chemistry, so just ignore all
that. No. Same here.
But then that makes me wonder, does it go bigger than that too? If it's not, if it can go so small, then oppositely, could it go so large as to say that even suns and planets have some level of free will as to where they are moving and like how they are in relation to these other solar systems and what have you?
Yeah. I actually watched a YouTube video the other week called "Is the Sun Conscious?"
No way.
Yeah. you should check it out. I don't think that I can't really do it justice right now. But it was compelling to say the least. Yeah, I think it goes in both directions. I just don't know exactly how to describe that. Somebody much smarter than me will one day. Yes, Jeffrey Sherman's got the right of it. Our answer should always be because electrons.
My question is, but why? Like, those are things that we've observed, but why is that the path that they choose to take? Like, why is it that, an even amount of electrons, like whatever, I'm trying to think like a hydrogen or helium has like 2 electrons or 8 electrons. It's been too long. It's been like literally nearly 15 years since I took chemistry. So.
Oh my God.
That might be it's a slight exaggeration. It's been like 12, but feels like forever. But this is a side note that's not fully related, but sometimes I wonder if, the very solar system that we're living in is a part of an atom that is a part of something in our reality. So like everything is within everything else, or if these solar systems they are very atom-like in nature. If you think about it, like you have a sun, then you have a plane that the planets spin around, and they don't really like go outside of this like plane. They spin and they spin within themselves, just like an atom. Like what if solar systems are atoms part of a bigger something, and we're just so small and so Have you really, Jeffrey? We're just like so small that we can't even perceive. And maybe that's what it's like to be an atom. Maybe an atom is a sun with planets around it filled with people. And it's such a monumental task to move from atom to atom because of how much space is in between it. You know, I just have like an image of like we're standing and then it zooms out and we're on Earth, and then it zooms out and we're the solar system, and it zooms out and we're standing, and it zooms out and we're the solar system, and like so on and so forth.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that sort of ties into the idea of things being cyclical, like you're not going to find an end. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I find that thought very appealing too. And I've definitely seen like images of like galactic clusters that look like neurons and so on. And yeah, it's really fascinating.
Well, I'm like feeling like really giddy because now I've just seen 3 people who are like, I've had the same thought. And I'm just like, I thought I was literally insane.
I mean, we could all be crazy. I think that we can't write off that possibility.
So all 4 of us are insane. It's cool, you know. Yeah. I'm trying to. Okay, so like question, or did you have another point? You said you had multiple, and that was
Yeah, I
one
think
point.
I only have one more, which is I guess like one of the things that made me start challenging the standard idea of scientific materialism, which we've talked about before in our emails, but I guess I can talk about it briefly for the sake of the dear audience here. The idea of the philosophical zombies. I don't know if you remember that one super well. No? Okay. So basically, the idea is that consciousness is like a really, really hard thing to figure out. Like, it's like the hardest thing that science has ever really contended with. And there are soft problems of consciousness, which is like, how does memory work? Like, where is what stored in the brain? And then there's the hard problem of consciousness, which is, why are we conscious to begin with? Like, why is there a subjective internal experience? And so there are like these thought experiments about philosophical zombies, essentially stating that it seems at least conceivable that there could be a universe exactly like the one that we live in, with people exactly like us, but there's no internal experience. Like, the lights aren't on. There's just like mannequin Jeffrey from the outside talking, but he doesn't have anything going on inside his head. He's just saying all the right words, and he's, you know, interfacing with you exactly as he is now. And like, that thought experiment, I found it really appealing as far as just making clear just how mysterious consciousness is. And it doesn't seem like we could ever reach a scientific explanation for why it's there. Like, you could talk exactly about like the mechanics of why it's generated, but you could still never like explain, but why though? But why is there like a subjective component? Why is that a necessary ingredient? It seems to require some sort of like jump in like your explanation that you can never really bridge. But anyway, like, that just opened me to like more possibilities of like thinking about consciousness, and maybe seeing consciousness as potentially foundational as opposed to the other way around. And that's all I got.
That is like something I feel like I'm gonna have to spend time thinking about.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever put my brain through such like that's like a lot of hard work to try to imagine that someone would be saying something without any like conscious awareness of what they're saying. And that does make you question, like, what is consciousness? What is our definition of it? How strong of an argument do we even have? Can we ever define it? And I think you're right in that there's going to be like no way to fully explain why, because, you know, I mean, maybe that's why there is an idea of God in the first place, because the question of why is just so difficult. It's so outside of us. It's something that we can't fully ever understand. So we give it a name so that we can just kind of get on with our lives instead of spending a bunch of time trying to figure it out. Which then, of course, there are still a bunch of people who are like, no, I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah.
But even just hearing myself say that aloud, that is another one of those thoughts that's putting you in a prism that's now saying it's impossible to figure out why. But what if the opposite also exists, where it is possible, where if we're all working together, somehow we can find that.
Right. Yeah. It's all open. It's all speculation. So I think that it could go in any direction.
Yeah, that's what our whole conversation has been pretty much, except like maybe the first like half an hour where we were trying to come up with like solid arguments.
Yeah. No, I think it's worthwhile to talk through things, even if you don't. I don't know. It's hard not to develop thoughts on things like this, even if you don't feel like they're fully supported. Like, especially if your mind wanders like mine does. It's like naturally I'm going to think things and find patterns and try to build something, even if I'm building like a castle in the air.
Have you seen Castle in the Sky, by the way?
Mm-mm.
Oh my gosh.
Not a movie guy.
It's anime. No.
I mean,
I
have seen some movies. I think the thing about movies, not to get too philosophical here, but with
no
a movie,
with
a movie, you have to like, especially if you're seeing it in a theater, you have to commit to the whole experience. But a TV show, I always have like these little moments of rest where I can contemplate whether or not I want to continue. I hate being trapped somewhere, and I feel like movies trap me.
But couldn't you say the exact same thing about a book, which, I mean, you're writing a book?
Yeah, and that's why I hate my book.
No, actually, that just gives me a side point that I just hate when books have endings that are just like, why can't you just leave it open? Like, why can't you just... But when I was younger, I used to hate books that leave it open. So, I mean, I've grown in that way where I used to like hate open-ended endings where like there is no like solid conclusion.
Yeah. Wait, so hang on, I got distracted by Jeffrey Sherman. Are you still that way, or you used to be that way?
Which way is that way? I'm sorry,
So,
I said both.
Oh, you're fine. You said that I thought you said that you used to hate when things didn't have a solid conclusion, but you said you've grown past that.
Yeah, now I wish that nothing had a solid conclusion because it's always not satisfying, and I'd much rather just leave it open to interpretation. Kind of like the 7th Harry Potter book at the end. It's just like a slapdash of like, these two couples got married and these two couples had kids.
Loose ends tied up everywhere.
And I'm just like, this completely cuts off 90% of the possibilities I had imagined for what could happen afterwards. And you're just ruining what would have been really great if you just left it at the end of that book.
Yeah. I didn't mind it so much, but it definitely didn't feel, it kind of felt like fan service and kind of empty.
Well, and it's like the same thing in the Hunger Games at the end in the 3rd book. The final epilogue is Katniss has a kid with what's his nose, Peeta, and I'm just like, couldn't we have just left this open? I mean, I get that she's gonna like say to her kid, you know, you're never gonna have to be in the Hunger Games, and that's cool. That's a nice metaphor, but really, like, I don't like scenes like that because I don't know, they just kind of I don't know. Now I think that Jeffrey and I are both getting tired from this conversation because we've done a lot of like mental heavy lifting.
It does. Yeah, it takes a lot out of me. I will say this though. I think that, well, I hope that you like the way that my book ends, because I feel like I do both. I feel like I give an ending that feels conclusive, but it's also like an invitation to reread the whole thing with like more possibilities in mind. I don't know if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, no, I like stories that do that, where like you want to read it again. And also it seems like yours is going to jump around too, like in terms of timeline and stories that are happening, which are going to like add to that.
Yeah. I think everything that I write, I try to write it so that it's interesting enough. Like I try to bury things in it for further reading, so I have to make it like compelling enough on the first time around, but still have stuff that you can like get, you know, out of a second reading or a third reading, which is hard to do, honestly. Even, well, maybe especially with a short story. But the short story, it's more like I want people to be like, "What did I just read? It's only a short story. Let me try again," and then like have like more context and figure it out the second time. But.
No, I definitely think I'm doing like the same thing with my book. I mean, our books are obviously about very different subjects, but I'm trying to like have like a very like layered novel to where there's a lot of things that you're gonna not catch the first read through that like will all come together the more you read it, and then you're gonna want to be like, whoa, wait, this happened. Kind of like an element of mystery in it, like where there's like these little like pieces that like once you get to the end, it all makes sense. Not exactly what you're saying, but similar.
But you have like a whole saga planned.
Yeah, but I still haven't planned exactly how the next 4 books are going to go, but I have a vague idea about what each of the books is going to be about generally. But at the same time, like the way that I'm using the books is as much for my philosophy as it is for my self-development. And so I don't think I'm ready to write the next books because I haven't hit that level of self-development, but I know that it's coming. Like for me, it's just as much about myself as it is the readers, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it makes sense, especially because it seems like you're working through like big moral questions. So it's like it's a process, right? It's not something that you've really fully tinkered and figured out yet.
Yeah, I don't want to like come out like with the 6-series book and be like, this is my philosophical ideas on life. And then as I get older, everything changes and I'm like, why did I rush this when I should have like taken a little bit more care and attention to the whole thing. But I don't know. Book 1 is pretty much ready. I pretty much have a very firm idea of like the moral that I'm trying to get out of book 1. Anyway, well, we got on a tangent on books.
Yeah, definitely a tangent. I think that I've sort of exhausted all that I can say at this time about souls.
I think so too. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching. Those of you who came at the end, we appreciate you being here so late. Well, for Francesca, it's like the afternoon, but
yeah, thank you, Francesca.
We appreciate you being here. And hopefully we will see you guys next Friday, where I talk to another ENTP. I have like 3 more ENTPs lined up. So
who are you talking to?
He's a guy that like commented on a few of my videos. Well, I don't know. He hasn't decided if he wants me to put his tag, like his YouTube comment tag, or if he wants to create an alter ego. So I'm trying to, he wants to decide how he wants to play that, like where he wants his anonymity. So I have like told him like, you know, you tell me when you're ready, and I don't want to like force him into a decision one way or another by saying his actual name. But
yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Well, with that, do you want to plug your channel real fast?
Oh yeah. I'm Jeffrey. My channel is ΔutoΔlchemy with some funky triangles for the A's, but you should be able to find it just by searching for ΔutoΔlchemy and MBTI if that doesn't get you where you need to be. Yeah, I talk about Myers-Briggs. I talk about self-development. I track personal projects. I am hoping to get a little more philosophical and talk about things of the same nature as what we talked about tonight. And I think that's my plug.
Woo!
Thank you guys for tuning in. Yeah, it was really nice to talk to Michelle.
Thanks for watching. I have fun in this conversation too, and I'm a little like mentally like, whew. Yeah. But thank you guys so much for watching, and hopefully we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye, guys.